The transmission was short. 17 seconds of static-laced video, smuggled through secure channels and firewalled systems, reaching a quiet Earth-based listening post orbiting Saturn's far moon Iapetus. Then silence. Not the kind of silence that meant someone had turned off a signal. No, this was the kind of silence that felt like the universe itself had stopped breathing. No one knew who had sent it, or how it had gotten past the blockade. But what it showed, what it proved, shattered every illusion humanity still clung to. A man in chains, bruised and stripped of dignity, kneeling before the ornate crest of the Galactic Council. His face was sunken, his ribs visible through broken skin. He tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by laughter. Not human laughter. Cold, echoing clicks and groans, the sound of those who had never known mercy. The camera zoomed in as one of the council's guards raised a long, curved staff. The feed ended. No one ever said the man's name. They didn't have to. Everyone on Earth knew who he was. He'd been the lead ambassador to the Galactic Council. The face of Earth's peace. The one who believed more than anyone that diplomacy could change everything. That the galaxy wasn't as cruel as it seemed. He trusted them. And they'd broken him. What came next wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't an order from governments or military commanders. It was something older. Something raw. It began in whispers. Murmurs in dark hallways, quiet gatherings in deep space hangars, encrypted messages bouncing across old satellite networks. A word spoken with a kind of weight that made people clench their fists without realizing it. Revenge. At first, the Galactic Council didn't take it seriously. Why would they? Earth was small. Isolated. A new member in their grand interstellar theater. One planet among thousands. A backwater species barely 2 centuries into spaceflight. To them, humanity was a flicker. Not a threat. But they forgot something. They forgot what Earth had survived. What it had learned from centuries of war, betrayal, struggle. What it became when backed into a corner. In the black beyond Neptune, aboard a ship with no name and no registry, Commander Halden stared at the recording again. He didn't flinch this time. Didn't look away from the final frame, the one where the ambassador raised his eyes just before the staff came down. There was no fear in those eyes. Only something that looked like apology. Halden's fingers hovered over the control panel. His jaw tightened as the ship's AI buzzed gently in his ear. Council patrol detected. 2 clicks out. He didn't respond. Just stood there in the dim blue glow of the cabin, surrounded by hollow silence. Behind him, a dozen others waited in the belly of the ship. Engineers, medics, ex-military. Volunteers. Every one of them had lost someone in the Council's quiet purges, the so-called corrections no one spoke of in public. They had no uniforms. No banners. Just grim faces and tired eyes. And one goal. Halden finally tapped the panel. The screen went dark. "Ready the payload," he said. They'd intercepted the patrol before. Not this close, not this risky. But the pattern was there. Council scouts always took the same route, always cut across the shadow of Neptune like they didn't expect resistance. Why would they? No one fought the Council. Not anymore. Halden moved to the lower decks where they kept the payload sealed in cryocargo. Not weapons. Not bombs. Stories. Testimonies. Recordings of every Council crime they could find. Smuggled out by defectors. Pulled from corrupted databanks. Even rumors. All of it, pain, betrayal, injustice, compressed into data bursts wrapped in neural lures designed to bypass Council security. If they couldn't outgun the Empire, they'd outsmart it. Overload it. Make its own citizens see what the Council had done. Because even empires built on fear still needed a lie to stand. He stood over the cryopods for a long moment. His hand rested on one of the crates like it was holy. Then the sirens blared. The patrol had spotted them. No choice now. Launch the burst, he said. And prep evasive. Outside, the stars twisted as the ship veered hard to port. The Council cruiser was bigger, better armed. Its engines glowed like a miniature sun as it gave chase. But Halden didn't need to win. He just needed to get away. And hope the truth would land before the ship was turned to ash. Meanwhile, deep in the mountain archives beneath Old Geneva, the last surviving Council historian of Earth leaned over a cracked screen. She wasn't born on Earth. Not really. Born in orbit, raised on stations, fed on stories and legends. But the day she saw the transmission, the same one Halden had watched, something in her changed. She began digging. Through redacted files, forgotten logs, the restricted Council archives that she once helped organize. And what she found shook her. Earth hadn't joined the Council. It had been absorbed. Coerced through manipulation, economic sabotage, staged civil unrest. Then made to believe it was welcomed. The ambassador? He was just the last thread of hope sent to negotiate better terms. And when he failed, when he saw the truth, they'd punished him publicly to send a message. But Earth didn't get the message they intended. The historian closed the files. Her hands trembled as she packed her data slate, her translator implant, and her only relic from Earth, a worn photograph of a green forest she'd never seen in person. She knew she couldn't stay. The council was already watching dissenters more closely. Soon they'd come for the archives. And her. She left that night. Quietly. Without goodbyes. She didn't know where she'd go. Only that somewhere humanity was preparing for something terrible. And she couldn't sit by and do nothing. Across a dozen sectors, other pieces began to move. Ships disappeared from trade routes. Stations once loyal to the council suddenly went dark. Unregistered signals began bouncing through the void, coded in old Terran dialects. The kind only humans would recognize. And still the council didn't see it. They were too focused on bigger threats. Pirate lords. Border skirmishes. Resource rebellions. What could Earth do really? Then came the first blackout. A core relay station in the Vega corridor went offline. When a council team arrived to investigate, they found the building intact, but abandoned. Inside, the walls were covered in ancient Terran symbols. Not warnings. Promises. 2 days later, another went dark. Then another. Some council worlds began receiving strange broadcasts, visions of Earth's history. The worst of it. War. Slavery. Genocide. Greed. But it didn't stop there. The broadcast showed how humanity survived it. How it changed. How it fought back. How it rebuilt. Each transmission ended the same way. A human face staring into the camera. Saying one line. We remember. And in the final second, a pulse. Barely detectable. But enough to trigger dormant protocols in long-forgotten AI systems seeded decades ago. The Council never even realized how deep Earth's roots had grown. They'd thought humanity was just another species. But humans didn't conquer planets. They infected systems, with ideas. Back on Earth, people watched from shadowed bunkers, orbital labs, hidden observatories. They knew the retaliation would come. The Council wouldn't tolerate this much longer. But they weren't afraid. Not anymore. They'd seen too much. Lost too much. And now, for the first time in a century, they were united. Old divisions, borders, languages, politics, they didn't matter anymore. Because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. About never kneeling again. In one of the underground command centers beneath the ruins of old Berlin, a child, no older than 9, sat beside her father, staring at a screen full of stars. She pointed at one bright dot. Is that where they heard him? She asked. Her father nodded. Will they come here now? Maybe, he said quietly. She was silent for a while. Then looked up. Are we ready? He looked down at her. And smiled. No, he said. We're waiting. Outside, in orbit, dozens of ships powered up, silent, sleek, invisible to standard scans. Not built for diplomacy. Built for memory. Built for fire. In the heart of the Council's capital world, the High Chamber met in emergency session for the first time in decades. Representatives from 200 systems sat in a vast circular hall of marble and glass, speaking over each other, faces twisted in disbelief and fear. We underestimated them, one barked. They're human, another spat. Primitive. Emotional. Exactly, said a third. You think they'll stop? After what we did? Silence fell. No one had an answer. A fourth representative stood slowly. Older than the rest. He'd served during the initial Earth campaign. Had walked their cities. Studied their books. Do you know what they used to say? He asked, voice low. Everyone turned to him. We don't start the fire, he murmured. He paused. But we finish it. No one laughed. Somewhere in the cold void between stars, Halden's ship limped forward, engines flickering, hull scorched. The Council patrol had hit them harder than expected. Half his team was gone. But the transmission had launched. And as he lay in the medical bay, barely conscious, a voice crackled through the comms. Not Council. Not Earth Command. A woman's voice. Soft. Tired. Familiar. I saw what you sent, she whispered. I'm coming. You're not alone. Halden smiled through the pain. Because that was all they needed. Not armies. Not fleets. Just each other. And the unshakable belief that no one, not even the Galactic Council, could stand against a world that had nothing left to lose. In the Council's deepest databanks, hidden behind layers of encryption, a red file began to blink. Project Terminus, active. Under it, 4 words in ancient Terran English. Words no one had seen in 100 years. The Earth strikes back. Then silence. But not the empty kind. The kind right before the thunder. The message spread faster than anyone had predicted. Halden's transmission, sent from the edge of nowhere, cracked through Council firewalls and data barriers like they were paper. First in hidden colonies, then on fringe outposts, then within the heart of core worlds themselves. Some said it wasn't possible. That the Council had layers of protection impossible to break. But it wasn't brute force that did it. It was belief. Human engineers had buried fragments of their code decades ago, hidden inside trade protocols and shipment logs. They had slipped pieces into the backbone of communication networks, wrapped inside harmless things. Images, music, even food storage data. Tiny bits of humanity. Waiting. Now those fragments came alive. Triggered by Halden's signal, they bloomed like wildfire across star systems. Old Earth songs echoed in forgotten corners of deep space. Terran history played out on public terminals and council plazas. Messages appeared in sleep pods, in vending machines, in maintenance drones. We remember. The words followed council officials like a shadow. They couldn't stop it. Every time they tried to erase the messages, new ones appeared. Stronger. Louder. Bolder. And people started asking questions. Why had the council gone to war with Earth in the first place? Why had the ambassador been publicly broken? Why had the council never shown the full footage? In quiet homes on distant planets, children watched humanity's pain for the first time, not as a lesson in failure but as a mirror. Parents found themselves pausing the videos, their hands trembling, realizing they'd been told only half-truths. Some cried. Some grew afraid. But many grew angry. And still, the council kept pretending it was nothing. A glitch. A minor rebellion. But the rebellion didn't stay minor. It grew in the cracks. On a moon called Lithari 4, beneath rust-colored soil, a woman named Sarah reassembled a dead relay tower with bare hands and grit-stained fingers. She had been a technician once, years ago. Before her brother vanished after volunteering for council peacekeeping duty near Earth. They never gave her a body. Only a flag. And a quiet apology. Now, she wired Earth's broadcast directly into the moon's central power grid. Every mining station. Every worker's tablet. Every old escape pod still wired into the grid. She didn't need orders. She had grief. And grief, when left unanswered, became purpose. When the broadcast began to play in the mines, hundreds of workers froze. The sound was scratchy but unmistakable. A recording of Earth's last true war, its cities burning, its people refusing to kneel, even when they had nothing left. Some miners removed their helmets, others just stared. They'd never known Earth. Only the stories passed down in whispers. Now they could feel it. Taste it. One man walked up to Sarah after the 5th loop. Why are you doing this? She didn't look at him. I just want the truth to mean something. He nodded slowly. And said nothing more. That night, they dismantled the council's surveillance tower on Lithari 4. No one stopped them. No one tried. Because even fear has its limits. Back in the council capital, Chancellor Viral paced the high chamber, his steps echoing through the polished marble halls. His once pristine robe looked wrinkled, his tone growing desperate. They're not just spreading messages anymore, he said to the inner circle. They're hijacking public terminals, flight systems, medical AI. They're in our infrastructure. Another counselor shook his head, disbelief masking fear. But they're humans. They don't have the reach. The council maintains all interstellar comms. You don't understand, Viral snapped. They don't need reach. They just need infection points. They built this network years ago. Under our noses. He leaned forward, pressing his palms against the table. This isn't war. It's contagion. A third voice, cooler and older, broke the silence. What do you suggest we do, Chancellor? Martial law. Sector-wide lockdowns. We isolate every human colony. We shut down non-essential communications. And we begin immediate extraction of known sympathizers. Even those around the table flinched. That's extreme. So is letting an entire species of insurgents unravel centuries of peace, he said, voice low. The word peace hung in the air like a lie no one wanted to admit. Outside, the council's great banners fluttered in artificial wind. They bore the crest of unity. But deep beneath them, fear was spreading faster than loyalty. In a small, forgotten refugee station near the Perseus Arm, An old man named Tile watched the chaos unfold on a flickering screen. He wasn't human. Not exactly. But close. He'd fought with humans decades ago when he was young and angry and believed in causes. Now he just believed in survival. And yet, as he watched the recordings, saw the ambassador kneel beneath council cruelty, something in him stirred. Something he thought he'd buried long ago. He reached into a box beneath his bunk and pulled out a worn patch. The symbol of an old Earth alliance. He didn't even know why he'd kept it. He ran a hand over the fabric and sighed. Maybe, he muttered to himself, it's not over yet. He sent a signal. Not long. Just a few lines of code. A call sign from a forgotten war. He didn't expect a reply. But one came seconds later. 2 words. We remember. Meanwhile, the historian who had fled Geneva found herself drifting aboard an old cargo skiff, making her way toward the outer edges of the Terran-controlled belt. She traveled under a false name now, her face altered slightly by underground biotech. Her real name was on every council alert beacon by now. She kept the old photo of the forest in her pocket. She didn't speak much to the crew. Just listened, watched, and recorded. What she saw was spreading everywhere. Not military might. Not open battles. But resistance. Not the kind taught in books. Not glory and banners. Quiet resistance. Dock workers refusing council orders. Pilots switching flight paths to avoid surveillance. Station commanders accidentally losing data. People who had no reason to help humans, doing so anyway. What? Because somewhere deep inside they realized what was happening. The council wasn't just scared of Earth. It was scared of being seen. And now it was too late to hide. In Earth's lower orbit, inside the shielded heart of an underground carrier named Verdict, the last of the human fleet began final calibration. They didn't call themselves an army. There were no medals. No fanfare. Just names etched on metal walls. Every name lost to council prisons. Every name erased from council records. Every name Earth refused to forget. The ship commander walked the halls, silent, checking systems, speaking little. But when he passed the engine core, he paused. There, a young technician, barely 20, covered in grease, was fixing a misaligned plasma circuit. She turned, startled, realizing who was behind her. Sir, I didn't think you'd be down here. He held up a hand. I just wanted to see it. The core. She stepped aside. The hum of the chamber filled the air. He stared at the engine that would carry them into council territory. And he whispered, mostly to himself, no turning back. The technician nodded, though he hadn't asked anything. No, sir. There's not. In the outskirts of Sector 19, a council destroyer went dark. No distress signal. No explosion. Just vanished. 2 days later it reappeared. Floating dead. Every system fried. Every backup cooked. Every console looping the same phrase in over 30 languages. We remember. Inside, no sign of the crew. Only their uniforms. Laid out in perfect rows. The council tried to cover it up. But the footage leaked. And the galaxy trembled. Not because humans were stronger. But because they were everywhere. And they were done waiting. Done apologizing. Done begging for respect. From the shadows, from broken stations and ruined colonies, they rose. Doctors who refused to treat council officers. Farmers who poisoned supply chains. Artists who painted the truth on every wall. The war wasn't in the stars. It was in the minds of those who'd once obeyed. And no matter how many weapons the council had, no matter how many soldiers, it couldn't fight the feeling growing in people's hearts. That maybe Earth wasn't the villain. Maybe the ones claiming peace had always been the ones breaking it. In a hidden chamber beneath a scorched Martian dome, Halden lay in recovery. Burns wrapped his arms. His lungs were damaged from vacuum exposure. He shouldn't have survived. But he did. Because someone found him. The woman with the voice. She sat beside him now, watching over him as machines beeped softly. You did more than you know, she said. He turned his head slightly. They get the message? All of them. He blinked slowly. Good. Now what? He was silent for a long time. Then, through a hoarse whisper. We wait. Wait for what? He met her eyes and, despite the pain, smiled. For them to break first. Outside, a signal was already pulsing. One word. Verdict. Not a ship name anymore. A warning. A promise. And a countdown. The signal reached further than anyone thought possible. Verdict. One word pulsing like a heartbeat through every known system, bouncing across fractured satellites, echoing through military channels, and sliding under the skin of council-controlled networks. People stopped what they were doing when it reached them. On distant outposts where the wind never stopped howling, on merchant ships drifting between trade routes, in cramped research stations tucked inside asteroids, everywhere. They all saw it. Verdict. No orders came with it. No face, no threats, no speeches. Just a quiet warning. One that said more than any declaration of war ever could. The council scrambled. Command chains flooded with confusion. Some believed it was Earth preparing for an assault. Others feared something worse. But the fear wasn't just of weapons. It was of what came next. Because something had changed. The council used to act in silence. Punishments happened behind closed doors. Suppression was a whisper, not a scream. Now the galaxy was watching. And the more people watched, the more they questioned. Why would Earth send truth as their first weapon? Why would a planet filled with so much pain still believe in something greater? Why didn't they burn everything down the first chance they got? In the high chamber, Chancellor Viral stood before the inner circle again, this time with no robe, no mask of calm authority. Just a tired face, worn by weeks of unraveling control. They've turned our citizens against us, he said. This is not a military invasion. It's a psychological siege. Some of the counselors didn't speak anymore. They just sat quietly as if afraid that even talking would mark them. One of them, a younger voice barely above a whisper, asked, "How did we not see this coming?" Viral didn't answer. Because he had seen it coming. He just hadn't believed they were capable. He looked up at the screens ringing the chamber. Dozens of systems with blinking alerts. Protests. Resource refusals. Internal conflicts. Council patrols disobeying orders. And in the center of the chaos, always that word. Verdict. It didn't even matter what Earth was planning anymore. The galaxy was cracking. And everyone was looking at Earth not with contempt, but with hope. That terrified Viral more than any fleet. Back on Earth, in the command center buried beneath the Icelandic crust, a meeting took place between commanders, techs, and civilians who had become part of the resistance. No one spoke over each other. No one argued. Everyone just waited. Until the main screen flickered and an old orbital scan appeared. Deep Council space, coordinates long marked as off-limits. A red zone. Not for danger. For secrets. Halden stood beside the console, still wrapped in bandages, his voice rasping but steady. "This is where they keep it," he said. "The archive," someone asked. He nodded. "Proof. Records of every purge. Every false treaty. Every silenced voice. All of it. It's there." One of the younger officers leaned forward. "How do you know?" Halden's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Because I saw it before they erased my access. I memorized the coordinates." The room went still. "You want us to go there?" the technician asked, voice trembling. "Not want. Need," Halden said. "It's suicide. It's justice." Someone else stood. "Even if we reach it, what then? They'll destroy us the second we breach their airspace." Another voice joined in. "Unless." They all looked toward the door. The historian stood there, pale and quiet. "Unless we use their own access codes," she said. Halden tilted his head. "You have them." "Not all. But enough. I worked in the archives for years. I know the layers. I know how to trick their defense network." "Then we're going in," Halden said. The silence that followed was heavy. They all knew what this meant. This wasn't an attack. It was an exposure. They weren't trying to destroy the council with weapons. They were going to destroy them with truth. But to do that, they'd have to make it through the most fortified region in the galaxy. And they didn't know who would still be alive on the other side. The preparations began that night. The ship Verdict was armed but not with standard weaponry. Its real power was information. Its entire database was designed to link directly into any open council system and flood it with data. Visuals, footage, testimony. The stories of those the council had erased. But they'd only get one shot. The closer they got to the core, the more resistance they'd face. Every relay station, every interceptor drone, every auto-defense platform. And even if they survived, they still had to break into the archive vaults without being vaporized on arrival. No one spoke of survival anymore. Only purpose. Outside, Earth's remaining ships began to align. Some bore scars from older wars. Some were built in secret under council noses. A few had no names, just call signs scrawled in fading paint. One by one they activated silent mode. And pointed themselves toward the heart of the Empire. In council-controlled space, commanders began locking down sectors. Civilians were told it was routine. Security maintenance. Unauthorized signal containment. The usual lies. But fear spread faster than reassurance. On moons, people started to vanish. Writers, activists, curious students. Anyone who'd shared Earth's message too publicly. Gone. And that, more than anything, lit the fire. Because now it was clear, the Council wasn't trying to stop war. They were trying to erase the idea of resistance itself. But it was too late. The idea was already alive. And ideas, once born, don't die quietly. Back on Lithari 4, the miners who once watched Earth's transmissions now armed themselves with drills and mining torches. Not to fight. To hold the Council's forces back just long enough. On Perseus 9, Tile rallied a band of retired soldiers. Mixed species, mostly old, mostly broken, but none of them cared. They'd seen enough in their lifetimes to know the difference between rebellion and reckoning. And across hundreds of systems, those who had once stayed quiet now began to speak, to act, to resist. The human message had become everyone's message. A last chance to stand for something before it all fell. Inside the verdict, the team moved without sleep. Systems were tested. Routes were recalculated. The historian walked the ship's halls, stopping sometimes to record audio logs. Personal stories. Names. Details that didn't belong in data files but in memory. Halden sat in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. He looked older than he had weeks ago. Not just in the body but in the eyes. The woman who had rescued him sat beside him now. She didn't speak for a while. Then she asked, "Are you afraid?" He didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said quietly. "But not for me." "For what then?" "For what comes after." She looked out the window too. "I don't think we get an after without this." "I know." He exhaled, slow and heavy. "I just hope we're right." "We are." "And if we're not?" She turned to him gently. "Then we go out knowing we tried." The ship pulsed beneath them, engines humming low, carrying their words into the silence. A silence soon to be broken. In the command deck, final coordinates locked in. ETA, 72 hours to breach point. There would be no backup. No reinforcements. If verdict failed, the Council would erase every trace of this movement. If it succeeded, the whole galaxy would see the truth. But there were things they didn't know yet. Whispers within the Council. Secrets buried even deeper than the archives. There were forces moving that didn't answer to Viral or the Chamber. Dark protocols. Hidden weapons. Systems designed not to defend, but to silence entire civilizations. And something, had just reactivated one of them. Not to stop Earth, but to end it. A long-dead project buried in Council code. Codenamed Shatterpoint. Its last use had wiped 3 species from history. And now the timer had started again. The Council wouldn't wait for Earth's evidence to reach the stars. They would bury the truth under fire. The race had begun. But the humans aboard Verdict didn't know it yet. Not fully. They would find out soon enough. As they crossed the last safe line between Rebel space and Empire space. And the stars around them began to flicker. Not naturally. Not peacefully. But with intent. Like eyes opening. Like teeth baring. And yet, they didn't turn back. Because for humanity, and all those who stood with them, this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about meaning. About making sure the last thing the galaxy ever forgot was who they really were. And why they chose to fight. The stars ahead of Verdict began to dim. At first no one noticed. Space always played tricks on the eyes. Shadows from distant suns, electromagnetic interference, debris clusters. But this was different. The black was becoming darker. Not just empty but cold, suffocating. On the command deck, the navigation officer tapped the side panel again. No errors. Nothing wrong with the equipment. But the readings made no sense. A stretch of void ahead showed nothing. No signal bounce, no radiation bleed, no background hum. Just dead silence. Even the long-range scans came back blank, as if that part of space had been carved out. Halden was pulled from his thoughts as warning beacons blinked red. He stood slowly, pain still tightening his limbs, and stared at the anomaly. "That's not natural," he said, voice quiet. No one answered. Because deep down they all felt it. Something was out there. The historian stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. She activated an old data module, flicking through ancient council files she had salvaged. The deeper she searched, the tighter her expression became. "This isn't a void," she said finally. "It's a field. A kill zone." The crew turned to her. The council's darkest projects. Most of them were theories, rumors. Shatterpoint was never fully documented, not in official archives. But there were whispers of a precursor defense system. Something automated, ancient. Hidden in regions marked inaccessible for safety. Safety from what? One of the techs asked. She turned the module toward them. A crude drawing. A human starship disintegrating in perfect silence. From this. An old protocol left behind by the early founding empires. Not built to target enemies, but ideas. Programs designed to detect ideological contamination. Uprisings. Messages of dissent. If it judged a signal to be too dangerous, it didn't jam it. It erased everything around it. Ships. Planets. Memory. And now the verdict was entering its reach. Halden exhaled slowly. So the council didn't build it, but they found it. They didn't just find it, the historian whispered. They learned how to use it. Outside, the darkness began to move. Not like a ship. Not like any known object. More like a wave folding in on itself, devouring light and signal as it spread. It wasn't chasing them. It was waiting. The crew erupted into motion, recalculating routes, boosting shields, scrambling for answers. But every simulation ended the same. If they turned back, they'd be caught and crushed by the Council's fleet. If they pressed forward, they risked triggering Shatterpoint's full activation. But time was already against them. Tile, watching from the edge of Council space aboard his retrofitted freighter, received the first fragmented burst of telemetry from Verdict. It was enough to catch his breath. The humans weren't just fighting a regime. They were walking into a weaponized legend. He activated a hidden channel, one he hadn't used in 20 years. Dozens of faces appeared on screen. Former rebels. Old war ghosts. People long thought dead. He didn't give them orders. He just said, "It's happening." And they understood. From every corner of space, forgotten ships powered up. Engines that hadn't hummed in decades came to life. Scars long healed split open again. They didn't care if they were too late. They were going anyway. Because even if they couldn't stop what was coming, they could stand with it. Back aboard Verdict, as the anomaly grew, the historian moved to Halden's side. "There's something else," she said. "A second layer." Halden looked at her. "Another weapon?" "No. A lie." She projected a hidden folder from the Council's backup registry. It was buried under thousands of junk records, mislabeled and locked with obsolete encryption. Inside, she found logs from a test station orbiting an abandoned planet. Decades old. Council scientists had experimented with truth-based information warfare, using fact to collapse rebellion. But it backfired. Instead of fear, they triggered unity. Instead of obedience, they sparked rage. The Council panicked. They built Shatterpoint not to stop war, but to stop the spread of truth. Halden stared at the logs. His jaw clenched. "They weren't scared of us," he said. "They were scared of what we remembered." And now, the very weapon designed to silence that memory was waking. The ship's lights flickered. Power levels dipped, then recovered. Their AI froze for 3 seconds, just long enough to notice. "It's scanning us," the engineer muttered. "It's deciding. Deciding if the verdict was a threat. Not because of missiles, but because of its message." They had one chance. If they could get close enough, long enough, to punch through with their data burst, directly into the core Council network, they could expose everything. But Shatterpoint had other plans. Behind them, multiple Council vessels dropped from faster-than-light. Not full cruisers, light interceptors, fast enough to stay just behind the verdict, hurting them. "They're trying to push us into the anomaly," the comms officer said. The trap was closing. Halden didn't hesitate. "Full burn. Take us in." The crew looked at him like he was mad. "Sir. They're going to kill us either way," he said. "We make them choose. Let the Council activate a genocide weapon on record. Let them pull that trigger in front of the galaxy." The historian nodded. "If they do it, we don't die alone." The engines roared. Verdict surged forward, the Council ships right behind. And the darkness ahead peeled open, like a mouth about to swallow them. At the same moment, on 36 rebel channels across known space, Tile and the others began broadcasting Earth's transmission. Not just the ambassador's execution. All of it. The cruelty. The lies. The loss. The memory. The network lit up. The Council saw it happening and scrambled to shut it down. But there were too many sources. Too many voices. Too many humans. Inside the high chamber, Chancellor Viral watched as system after system reported breaches. The archive was no longer a secret. People were watching the truth unfold in real time. And then a final message blinked across the top of every Council screen. "Verdict en route to archive vault." All eyes turned to Viral. He didn't speak. He just lowered his head. because even he knew. There was no stopping it now. Not without becoming the very monster they always denied being. But monsters don't think. Monsters react. The council sent the command. Shatterpoint engaged. And the field began to shift. Inside Verdict, every system screamed red. The crew stared into the blackness ahead, feeling it pull at their minds, their memories. But no one turned away. Not now. Because behind them was fear. But ahead of them was the end of lies. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. They gripped their stations, locked their eyes on the target. 3 minutes to impact. 1 second from history. And the stars, for the first time in ages, held their breath. The countdown had begun. 3 minutes. The Verdict plunged into the shadow of the Shatterpoint zone, its hull groaning under the pressure of a weaponized silence that didn't just dampen signal. It felt like it stripped meaning. Every screen inside the ship flickered with static. For a moment, the crew couldn't even hear their own breathing in their earpieces. And then it came back, faint, fractured, like sound was dragging itself through mud. Halden stood at the front of the command deck, one hand gripping the edge of the control panel, the other wrapped around the faded patch of the ambassador's insignia. The council had killed the man's body but not his voice. And now that voice was racing toward the very heart of the Empire. 17 seconds, said the technician beside him, her voice tight, eyes fixed on the burn path they'd carved toward the archive vault's data hub. Behind them, council interceptors broke formation. They'd realized the truth. They weren't chasing a ship. They were chasing a signal they couldn't afford to let reach its target. But it was too late. The historian, seated at the data terminal, began the final transmission sequence. Every testimony, every hidden recording, every whispered name from Earth's long list of silenced souls, compressed, sharpened, weaponized through memory. The payload wasn't built to destroy. It was built to show. Not only what had been done to Earth, but what had been done to every voice that ever questioned power. 1 minute to transmission. And then the anomaly changed. It stopped pulling. It opened. A corridor, perfectly symmetrical, cut across the black like a wound. Lights activated along its edges. Blue. Then red. A direct path to the archive. This is a trap, whispered the historian. They want us to come in. To deliver the payload ourselves. But why? Asked the pilot. And then the realization hit. Halden's voice was flat. They're not trying to stop us anymore. They're trying to trace us. They want to watch the signal launch and track every node it touches, so they can wipe it all out in one sweep. The crew froze. If they launched the truth from here in this corridor, they wouldn't just be risking Verdict. They'd be exposing every allied system connected to the message. Every resistance base. Every human colony that had chosen to believe in the story. One choice. Send the truth and risk extinction. Or hold it back and let the lie win. Silence stretched like a knife. And then the young technician, barely 20, grease still on her hands, spoke. I left my brother on Colion 3. He built one of the relay stations. He's waiting for this. I told him it was coming. The pilot added, my sister's got a kid. She teaches them old Earth music. They play it under the council's nose. They think it's just a sound. Another voice joined. My mother died in a work camp. No grave. Just a number. She told me, make sure they know we were real. The historian stood slowly. I can send it from a different node, she said. A backup path. Slower. But it won't be traceable. Halden looked at her, eyes narrowing. From where? She hesitated. Here. Inside the anomaly. The ship's system sparked at that. The radiation. The field strength. It would tear her apart within minutes of opening the manual port. You won't survive that, Halden said, already knowing the answer. She nodded. No. I won't. But why you? The technician asked. The historian's voice cracked slightly. Because I helped build the lie. Because I filed the reports. Because I thought following the council made me important. She turned to Halden. I need to make it right. Halden's jaw clenched. But he nodded. Not as a commander. As a human. A simple handshake followed. Then she left the command deck, walking alone down the main corridor to the secondary launch chamber. Alarms were screaming now. The interceptors had opened fire. The Verdict shook under impact. Shields collapsed. Systems began dropping one after another. They didn't have much time. In the belly of the ship, the historian stood before the launch array. Her hands trembled. The field outside the window wasn't black anymore. It was blue and red and white lines of artificial code built to mask terrorist technology. Her fingers flew over the controls. She opened a channel. Broadcasting now, The message left the ship not like a bomb, but like a breath. And somewhere, on a council-aligned farming world, a young girl saw her first Earth image, two hands holding each other through a chain-link fence. On a trading moon, a mechanic watched the ambassador's speech and censored for the first time. On a prison ship, a riot broke out, not of violence but of remembrance. And across the council's data core, alarms blared. They had failed. The message was everywhere now. They couldn't contain it. They couldn't unhear it. Back aboard the Verdict, Halden watched as the screen lit up with confirmations. Signal received. Signal received. Signal received. But then came the twist. One more notification. Unknown connection detected. The signal had bounced somewhere else. Not a human colony. Not a rebel ship. A system not listed on any star chart. Deep in untraveled space. Coordinates scrambled, origin unknown. A final line appeared. Message received. We're coming. Halden's eyes widened. What the hell is that? But before anyone could answer, the ship trembled. The historian's chamber exploded in white light. Then static. She was gone. But the transmission lived. The Verdict shook again, fires blooming in the rear compartments. Council ships swarmed around them, angry, desperate. The pilot shouted, "They're going to board us." Halden stood. Then we opened the airlocks. The crew braced. But just as the council ships closed in for the kill, the unknown signal blinked again on their screens. It wasn't just coming. It was here. From outside the system, rips tore across space like fabric being unzipped. Ships emerged. Not Earth-built. Not council. Tall. Silent. Gleaming. Dozens of them. No markings. No transmissions. Only one shared signal pinged across the comms. We remember too. Council ships broke formation. Some fled. Others opened fire, and vanished in an instant. The newcomers didn't ask questions. They shielded Verdict. They opened safe corridors. And they sent only one message to Earth. The truth you shared reached beyond your world. The crew stared in stunned silence. Somewhere beyond fear, beyond war, Earth had awakened something else. Something old. Something watching. And all it had needed was proof that someone still cared. The council fled the system in pieces. Back on Earth, the last council agents abandoned their posts. On Lithari 4, Sarah watched her mining crew hold up old Terran flags with tears in their eyes. In deep space, Tile smiled for the first time in decades. And on the screen, the face of the ambassador returned one last time. Still bruised. Still broken. But free. As if the universe had finally remembered what he died trying to say. And through the noise, through the chaos, one final whisper echoed across the stars. No empire lives forever. Then silence. But not the empty kind. The kind that comes after something ends. And something else begins. The aftermath was quieter than anyone expected. No parades. No thunderous announcements. Just a strange, spreading stillness across the stars as the old order unraveled, thread by thread. The Verdict drifted in orbit above what used to be an untouchable council outpost. Now its buildings stood empty. Terminals played the truth on repeat. The council flags had fallen to the floor, some trampled, some untouched, like they no longer had meaning. Halden sat alone in the ship's observation bay, watching a sunrise he didn't recognize. The planet below was green and gold, its skies thick with mist. One of the resistance fighters had called it a quiet world. No battles. No stories. But now this was where the council's hold had been broken. He pressed his hand against the cool glass, memories swirling in his head. The ambassador's final scream. The silence of the archive vault. The historian's voice as she sent the signal with full knowledge she wouldn't live to see its impact. They had all paid something. And in return the galaxy had changed. But the question remained, what now? The unknown fleet had vanished after defending Verdict, slipping back into space without a name or a home. Their only message had been, "We remember." Some believed they were an old civilization that had once resisted the council and survived. Others thought they were artificial remnants of a people lost to time. Halden didn't know. He wasn't sure he wanted to. It wasn't the mystery that stayed with him. It was the fact that they had answered. Somewhere out there, someone had heard Earth's cry, not just as a story but as a reason to stand. Back on Earth, the skies were no longer guarded. The orbital defense grid remained, but no ships hovered with threats. Council satellites had either fallen or fled. The silence left behind was unnerving at first, like the hush that comes after a long cry. But then the rebuilding began. It didn't happen in big announcements or new governments. It started in smaller ways, people fixing what had been broken for so long. On old streets where rubble had once buried memory, murals were painted. Not of leaders or flags but of moments. A child holding her father's hand. A technician rewiring an old data unit. A crew standing at the edge of annihilation, refusing to back down. On Lithari 4, Sarah walked into the mining tunnels one last time. She placed a rusted emblem, once belonging to her brother, against the wall and sealed it there, welding it into the rock. It wasn't a grave. It was a promise. Never again, she whispered. Tyle returned to the refugee station where he'd once watched the movement unfold. It looked the same but it felt different now. People greeted each other like old friends. He took off the patch from his coat and gave it to a young kid asking about Earth. You'll know what to do with it, he said. In orbit, the verdict received one final transmission from the council. It wasn't a surrender. Just a statement. A tired voice, a man whose name no one recognized. Not Viral. Not any of the known faces. Perhaps someone who had been buried deep in the system, now left to speak in the ruins of power. You've won, the voice said. Not just with weapons or words, but with the one thing we never could control. Memory. He paused. And now we don't know who we are without our lies. The line went dead. And the council fell silent for good. The archives the verdict had breached were unlocked to the galaxy. People began downloading fragments, stories, censored footage, voices of the forgotten. Whole families discovered they hadn't been the only ones to suffer. It was all there now. The cruelty. The fear. But also, the courage. HFY, humanity in its rawest form, was no longer just about Earth. It was about anyone who had stood in silence and finally dared to speak. Anyone who had bent under the weight of oppression and still got back up. The phrase spread across cultures, rewritten in different alphabets, spoken in accents the humans didn't even recognize. But the meaning was always the same. Fight not because you hate. Fight because you remember. Halden walked through the ship, nodding to his crew. Some were laughing for the first time in weeks. Others simply sat, writing letters, drawing, speaking softly with their families through long-delayed messages. In the med bay, the young technician who had refused to abandon her brother was resting. She had taken a hit when the last blast wave from the anomaly struck, but she was recovering. She smiled weakly when Halden entered. They say we did it, she said. He smiled back. You did. She looked out the window. Feels like we should be doing more. You are. Every minute you live after all this, every time you smile, that's more than they ever wanted us to have. She looked down. Do you think they'll come back? The council? Halden's voice dropped, steady. If they do, they won't find us the same. And he meant it. The humans were no longer isolated. They had networks now, alliances not based on fear but truth. Former council-aligned species reached out cautiously, some in shame, others in curiosity. Earth didn't lash out. They listened. They let people talk. They told their story. Not in rage but with clarity. That was the difference. HFY wasn't about dominance. It was about enduring. Not because they were the strongest, but because they never stopped caring. In time, new systems formed. Loose coalitions. Trade resumed. Education networks rebuilt. Ships once marked as enemies were painted anew. And in every corner of the stars, remnants of Earth's signal still played, sometimes faintly, like a ghost in the air. On quiet nights, some swore they could hear the ambassador's voice whispering not in pain, but in peace. We remember. And now the galaxy did too. Years passed. Children grew up reading about the days when a single ship carried a truth that no weapon could bury. They asked their parents what it felt like to watch that story unfold. Some smiled. Some wept. Some just said, it made us believe again. In the end, the verdict was retired, not dismantled but preserved. It sat in orbit above Earth, its lights dimmed, like a monument not of war but of witness. Tour groups came, quiet and respectful. Some touched its walls like it still held voices inside. Halden never returned to command. He lived near the coast in a simple home overlooking the sea. Some days he sat by the window reading. Other days he just listened to the wind. He didn't speak much about the past. He didn't have to. The story was out there now. The galaxy knew. And that was enough. When he passed, they didn't build him a statue. No parades. Just a small plaque at the edge of the sea. A single line. Asterisk. He didn't raise his voice. He carried the message. Asterisk. The technician stayed in service, training new engineers. The child on Kalan 3 who had waited for his sister's message eventually became a writer. His first book opened with the line, I was too young to remember Earth's fury, but I carry its echo. And far beyond, in a sector no one controlled, a signal pulsed once every year. No words. Just a tone. A heartbeat. The same one embedded in Earth's message. Still playing. Still remembering. Because the truth doesn't end when the war does. The truth lives on in those who dare to speak it. And Earth, after all its scars, after everything it had lost, had taught the galaxy how to feel again. How to stand. How to matter. Even in the darkest corners of space. Even after being forgotten. It reminded everyone of what it means to be human. And that was the real victory. Not fire. Not vengeance. But meaning. Always.